This video is for AQA AS Business Studies, Unit 6, which is Human Resource Management, and it's looking at the key differences between redeployment and redundancy. Now, redundancy is the removal of a role from a business. There could be many different reasons as to why this role has been removed, and one of the reasons could be a change to the organisational structure. So, for example, if they're deciding to delayer and remove a layer from the hierarchy, that might result in redundancy. It might be because of financial misfortune for the company. Maybe the business is experiencing poor sales. Maybe they're seeing rising costs, and labour being a massive cost is one way that they quickly reduce it. Maybe it's because they're moving from a labour-intensive company to a capital-intensive company, and therefore that this labour that has now been made redundant has been replaced by capital goods. Perhaps they've been replaced by another firm. So, for example, this company has decided to outsource its production to another company, and therefore this labour is no longer needed. So these are some of the reasons why redundancy might take place, and I'm going to give you some real-life examples to kind of support these points. So there's been quite a lot of redundancies in the supermarket industry recently. Some of it is because of the arrival of discount supermarkets such as Aldi and Lidl that have put pressure on, for example, the top four. Some of it, again, because of technology, and self-scanning machines, for example, could have had an impact. If we think about Rolls-Royce, they decided to cut 400 senior management jobs. And again, the reasons why they did that was for two reasons, actually. Profit warnings, but also when the new CEO came in, Warren East, he realised that the structure was it was too tall, it was too complex, it was too bureaucratic, and it was causing inefficiency, so they decided to delayer. If you think about the post office, they went from the public sector to the private sector, and one of the reasons for that, so they could get the post office back on track, and I suppose the new objective of being profitable means that costs need to be cut, and again, therefore that could have caused the 420 job to be redundant. Now, depending on the rate of redundancy, it can gain a lot of media publicity because obviously the impact it can have on the economy in terms of unemployment. Now, the video that I'm going to show you is a good example of one that did get media publicity due to the sheer size of the redundancy.
HSBC is Europe's biggest bank and employs 48,000 people in the UK. Today, that number is being cut by 8,000. It means 1 in 6 staff who work for HSBC here will lose their job over the next 2 years. Why? Well, it's because making money from banking is much tougher now.
The good times are over. Since the 2008 crisis, the regulators have tried to ensure that banks don't make profits just out of trading. So a lot of the trading for own profits has been shut down by the rules.
The bank wants to save £3.2 billion. So as well as cutting back on staff, they'll be closing branches too. Now, the Chief Executive of HSBC, Stuart Gulliver, says we recognise that the world has changed and we need to change with it. But the unions are worried about what it will mean for workers.
HSBC is one of the few employers where there isn't a voluntary redundancy scheme, and we're going to be demanding, in fact, for one to be implemented for this change. If we understand it correctly, the job losses don't need to be made until the end of 2017, so there's a proper time for the bank to really consider this.
The past year has been one of the toughest in HSBC's 150-year history, with scandals around tax evasion, mis-selling financial products, and even the recent FIFA drama is dragging HSBC's name through the mud. This restructuring plan is the bank's attempt to turn things round and maximise profits.
It's headquartered in London at the moment, but it's affected by specific taxes in the UK, which are problematic for HSBC, and also by British government plans to ring-fence retail banks from investment banks, and that also affects HSBC, which runs a high street operation as well as a global investment bank. So those are big costs for HSBC. HSBC has been trying to reduce its size for many years now. It wasn't that long ago that it employed over 350,000 people. Now it's 260,000. It's reduced the number of countries that it operates in. Before the financial crisis, banks were very keen to operate in almost every country in the world, because making profits in banking pre-2007 and 2008 was frankly a much easier job. That has all changed now with new regulations, new capital requirements for banks. It means that making money in countries is now difficult. That means you have to go for profit, smaller, easier to manage.
So you can see for HSBC, the main reason why they had to make redundancies was due to trying to cut costs. Now, what was interesting within that video is the trade unions that mentioned that there was no volunteer redundancy scheme within HSBC. Now, what we're going to look at in this video is how redundancies can take place and what seems to be the general procedure for firms, or what trade unions would expect the procedure to be. So the first step that maybe that a company might carry out is ATR, which is Alternatives to Redundancy, and that's allowing employees to take time off to actively seek work elsewhere. The reason why firms might do that, and they might be willing to lose that staff member for a period of time to help accommodate for this, is to kind of avoid the redundancy package costs that might take place. So if an employee is able to find work elsewhere, then that would reduce that. Now, again, in that video, the trade unions were talking about voluntary redundancy. That's asking the staff who'd like to put their names forward for redundancy and who wouldn't mind being made redundant. Yes, they'd still get a financial package from that. And you may think, well, why might employees want that? Well, there could be multiple different reasons. Maybe they want to get the early redundancy so then they can seek work elsewhere before they believe compulsory redundancies take place. Maybe it's because they were planning on leaving the business anyway, so therefore they're doing it quickly. But if there's no voluntary redundancy, then yes, it's forced to compulsory redundancy. Now, what that's based on, it could be multiple different factors. It could be based on the performance rates of the employees. It could be to do the skills audit and the I suppose the variety and the mobility of labour. Can they be redeployed, which we'll look at soon. It could be to do with their disciplinary record. It could be to do with their absenteeism rate. It could be just to do with the role itself and what their role is, and whether it's so essential for the business that it can't be made redundant. So there's lots of different ways redundancy can be carried out, but often it goes from voluntary to compulsory. Now, obviously, redundancy is it's a difficult topic in terms of the impact it can have on employees. First of all, employees, when they hear the word redundancy, fear obviously will hit them straight away. Job security is minimised. They're worried about, okay, if they've not been made redundant this time, will it happen in the future? Some employees might feel that businesses are letting the labour force down, and the business could find other ways of cutting costs. Trade unions may also feel the same, and it could cause some industrial action where trade unions maybe arrange such factors or such movements as strike action. It can cause media publicity, as we've already seen from that news broadcast, and it can harm sometimes the reputation of the firm because the public believe that they are letting the economy down. The video that I'm going to show now is actually based on the public sector, and it's based on the BBC in terms of their redundancies. And you can see that the trade unions have been involved, but you can also see that the government are trying to relieve some of the pressure from the trade unions and I suppose, in terms of their angle with how they approach the topic.
Radio and TV output on the BBC is being disrupted today by a 24-hour journalists' strike. They're protesting over compulsory redundancies. BBC News.
At the BBC's new broadcasting house headquarters, Radio 4's Today programme was one of the early casualties, as many regular news programmes were cancelled. Members of the National Union of Journalists are protesting at the BBC's decision to make compulsory redundancies. Staff at BBC Scotland are among those at risk. In Glasgow, they mounted a picket line outside its Pacific Quay studios. Pickets were on duty too at Salford, but many programmes on Radio 5 Live and most non-news programmes elsewhere have continued normally. The BBC says it's disappointed the union has taken strike action, and it's apologised to audiences for the disruption to services. It says industrial action can't alter the fact that it has significant savings targets. And it says it's made considerable progress in reducing the need for compulsory redundancies using volunteers and redeployment. The NUJ says it's taking action in Belfast and elsewhere to defend jobs and what it called quality journalism.
There's an agreement between the unions and the BBC on redeployment, and it just hasn't worked. And unfortunately, we found ourselves having to take strike action to try and highlight our concerns, not just for individuals at risk, but also for the future of the BBC and the quality broadcasting that we think the public deserve.
Union members walked out at midnight. Managers and other staff are working to produce some programmes. The strike is due to end later tonight. John Williams, BBC News.
So as we can see from the video, one of the reasons for the industrial action and the strikes was because the employees didn't feel that BBC were really considering redeployment as much as they should. They did carry out some redeployment, but they didn't believe it was enough. And this is an ongoing argument from trade unions and Labour. If we think about, for example, Asda was making 800 staff cuts, and again, what they threatened was, we either make these redundancies or you all take pay cuts. However, they will explore redeployment opportunities as well. Now, you could argue, are they exploring it just to kind of, I suppose, keep peace with trade unions and show that they are trying and keep employer and employee relations in order? Redeployment is one of those, though, that if they are able to achieve it, then it does show that the labour force, that the business is trying their hardest not to make the redundancies, and that could ease some of the, I suppose, the conflict caused by potential redundancy worry, and it could help to improve or keep employee relationships high, because it shows that they value the staff and they're trying to redeploy them in different ways. Now, what redeployment, what it relates to is, instead of making them redundant, try to actually employ them in a different role elsewhere in the company. That could be in a different functional area. It could be in a completely different role. It could be in a different, maybe, channel, a different site. So there's lots of different ways they could carry out redeployment. However, what it does depend on is if there is actually opportunities available. Have they got the opportunity to be redeployed? If they're making massive cuts and the business is maybe their corporate objective is to survive, then redeployment probably would look unlikely. It also depends on the mobility of the workforce. Now, if the workforce are very mobile, it probably makes redeployment quite easy. So if they've got various degree of skills, experiences, qualities, then they should be able to be redeployed quite easily with an easier transition.